Welcome to the channel's book club. Dr. Otiono is a distinguished Nigerian journalist who has been appointed assistant professor at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada, hence becoming the first appointee at the university's newfound Institute of African Studies. This came after he won the prestigious Banting postdoctoral fellowship. Dr. Nduka obtained his PhD in English from the University of Alberta, where he won several awards.
Hello everybody, my name is Beverly Osu from Big Brother Season 8, The Chase. What I'm here to tell you guys about is books are very important. No knowledge is wasted, and as you know, readers are leaders. So the more you read, the more you have a broad vision of life. Keep watching the channel's book club. Thank you.
Good to have you on the channel's book club. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
You spent a lot of years in Nigeria in the field of journalism. Then you moved to Canada. I'm sure a number of people will be curious to know, what has life been like for you? What was that transition like? What have you been up to?
I think I see my life as having been on a roll, for a while now, in the sense that you have mentioned, because I had been for quite a number of years, almost 1.5 decades, functioned as a journalist in different media houses. And then I had, even as a journalist, worked mainly in the area of literature and ideas, and had gone on to teach at the University of Ibadan. So I had experienced that kind of tension between my media inclination and my vocation as a writer and an intellectual. So I finally shifted more to academia, and then moving to Canada afforded me the opportunity to do the PhD program that I was struggling with while as a journalist, and then doing it at the University of Ibadan. And then it's been a lot of challenge, but it's also been very exciting because I have been fortunate in many ways, being that I got some kind of, I got tremendous funding for my doctoral work, and I have been blessed with a number of awards and prizes that have cushioned otherwise the challenge of moving abroad, and then with family, and having to, as it were, reset my life from a career in journalism to an academic life. So it's been, a mixed bag, as you would imagine. Exciting moments, challenging moments, and moments that I had wished that I had also continued my work as a journalist. But all in all, it's been really exciting, and I'm happy at how things have gone from the very moment I decided to move on into an academic life to this moment where I have been appointed as assistant professor tenure track at Carleton University, Ottawa.
You seem in a position to have a broad view of the literary space in Nigeria. You've written books, award-winning books. You were general secretary of ANA, a journalist for 15, 16 years. What do you think about the literary space in Nigeria and even across the continent? What's your view? What's your perception? What's the position of, or the situation of the literary space in Nigeria?
We're fortunate that Nigeria has continued to be, as it were, the center of active literary production in the continent, and I believe also in the world. Not only has the country been blessed by great writers like Chinua Achebe and Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka, and so many other writers, J.P. Clark and so on, of the first generation, Mabel Shegun, a fantastic children's literature writer. But also we have witnessed there's some transformation across generations. And each of these generations have come into its own and have also continued to maintain a certain kind of literary heritage. This is already exemplified by, I think we might run into trouble if we begin to want to identify specific names with specific generations. But in terms of Nigerian literary space, it's been very active and very productive. More recently with even the younger ones, I would say the newer generation or newer writers, because there are always that kind of conflict when we speak in terms of generations. Should we be talking about age as a demarcation or as an indicator, or should we be talking about time period as an indication of generations? So while bearing that into consciousness, it's important to note that for the past 50 years, from the publication of Things Fall Apart in 1958 to this moment, there has been a flowering of writing across different genres, whether it's poetry, fiction, or drama, and even also in the area of essays and the short story. So this has been replicated by the various generations, and they have also begun to win or have won international prizes to prove it.
How about the reading culture? I mean, somebody might take you up on that and say, is it really an exciting time for writers? Yeah, there are many new writers coming up, but how about the reading culture? Are people reading? From where you sit, what do you see?
Yeah, the reading culture is always a very complicated question that also requires complex answer, in the sense that some people would say, as is often the case, that the reading culture has died. But the question I like to pose is more specific kind of question. What aspects of reading has died? Because I know that lots of Nigerians are reading scriptures, they are reading religious tracts and religious books. They are reading how to do books, how to get rich quickly. Yeah. And then when you go to the newsstands, as I often do, I love visiting newsstands in the very busy bus stops, because it's like a hub. That's where you hear the rhythm of the city. And that's where you can actually feel, either through the literary pages of the newspapers where they exist, or the arts pages, or even, the general response of people. And so when you go there, there is an interesting trend that has emerged in the past few years. There are more literary, not literary now, you'll find on those newsstands a lot of religious books, Christian books. And then you would also find, you won't believe it, a lot of computer books and a lot of business books. Let's not even call them in some cases books. They are more like tracts or pamphlets, some of those kind of things that are done quickly, whereby the authors or the producers have two things in mind. Some of them actually want to communicate knowledge, and others want to also cash in on selling those things quickly, because these are the things that people are more preoccupied with. It's evident in the churches that all over the country, certain streets, almost every other house you see is a church. And so this also is transferred into the kind of production of books, the kind of books that are being produced, and the people who are consuming them. And the audience for this cuts across age and social class. Different people, whether they're educated, they're not so well educated, and so on. And then I have seen lots of computer books, that are also being sold, how to set up businesses and so on. So people are reading. The other question we ask, if they are reading, why aren't they paying so much attention to literary publication? And I think that's a very extensive area for us to discuss, because there are issues that have to do with the cost of book production, the infrastructure for publishing, and so many other things that have nearly killed the book. But the fortunate thing for us at our time is that the idea of globalization with the new media, on your lap here is an iPad. So people have now turned also to reading online. But when we talk about the death of a reading culture, we tend to ignore the amount of time people spend reading stuff on social media. Some of them are literary texts, as in short stories, poetry, being published by a generation that do not have access to traditional channels of publication, as the preceding generation of writers had, say, Professor Otiono and so on. And so we have to be very clear in our understanding of the reading culture, how it has metamorphosed or how it has become more complicated, going beyond just going to a physical space where there's a bookstore to buy a book and read, to where people are accessing them on tablets, they're accessing them on cell phones and other portable devices.
Is there a general disregard for intellectualism in Nigeria. I mean, there are quite a number of evidences to point out. The some of the things you mentioned now, the tendency to focus more on spiritual or religious books, the consistent strikes of our universities, the state of public libraries in the country. The other day I was at the National Library. I wasn't too happy, what I saw in terms of the state of the place. And there are so many evidences like that. And then, of course, people like you going to Canada to study, and there are quite a number of you like that, brilliant minds who have left the shores of the country. Is there a disdain for intellectualism in Nigeria? And how do we deal with this problem? How do we solve this problem?
I won't say that there's a disdain. There might not be the kind of focus on the economy of knowledge production the way it ought to be. Because it's very important for us to know that the significance of intellectual exertions or people's focus on the offerings of the mind also borders on development of nations. Because any nation that is not, any country that is not engaged at the level of knowledge production is likely to suffer a great disadvantage, internationally. Because a whole lot of things now depend on innovations, on science, on having access to new knowledges, if we might use that expression. At that level, it would appear from what is going on, if just by sampling Nigerian secondary schools or the school certificates results, or the JAM results, that yes, there's a decline. Maybe not a disdain. There is a decline, but also the disdain would apply when we begin to analyze the kind of attention people in power, to use a very popular Nigerian expression, where political leaders see themselves as people in power, not just as servants of the people, i.e. people who have control of the levers of power and whose hands are on the treasury, and also determine the kind of policies that influence either the production of knowledge or the lack thereof. So in that case, yes, one can say that there has been some kind of disdain or total disregard for the offerings of the mind. And what this has done in turn is that it has forced some people whose entire life and vision border on production of knowledge, to seek greener pastures, if you might excuse that cliche, elsewhere. Because if you were a writer and you know that this is a singular gift that you have and you're giving everything that you have to it, and you discover that you're working in an environment that does not fully appreciate what you're doing, and you do not even have the infrastructure to support it, then you're likely to seek more commodious environment where your work will be appreciated and where you can excel. And this is responsible for the massive brain drain that we have witnessed, especially amongst a certain class of intellectuals or the intelligentsia who believe that they can thrive elsewhere and can compete elsewhere. But it does not come without a price, because in living abroad, you also, as it were, suffer some kind of opportunity cost. You're cut off from the very environment that stimulates your writing, the very environment that has produced you. And then you are now, in a sense, writing back to it. Or in my own case and the case of a few other people, you will now have to travel back to reconnect. But thank God that the digital devices provide through Skype and every other thing for instantaneous communication. And then the very popular and almighty pinging in Nigeria with BlackBerry Messenger. So all of these are offered, a handle or different kinds of handle for us to continue to engage in the production. But at the level of policy, yes, I think that we can advisedly. No, in fact, we can just discard the whole idea of saying advisedly. People in power have demonstrated some kind of disdain for the offerings of the mind and for intellectual production. And this, in turn, has led to the kind of decay we have witnessed in the universities. It has also led to the death of many academic journals. It's led to the death of, opportunities for young people to thrive. Book clubs, debating societies. These are the total infrastructure for the production of knowledge. And then, competitions. I remember back in my secondary school in the